My name is Salva Mendiola. I'm a reporter with the local news Telemundo Chicago, and I'm also the host of one of our public affairs shows, Enfoque Chicago, here in the great city. And I was invited to be the MC tonight, and I'm very happy to do it. When I was invited, they told me, "Oh, we would like you to be here. You know, you work in news in Mexico and here." And I just remember, like, how can I start my speak? And a little bit of a short story when I work in Mexico. Working the news there is definitely different than here. Working there, people they say, "What is the big difference?" And I always say, well, here I don't have bruises, moretones on my arms. And people say, "What do you mean moretones on your arms?" And I say, yeah, because when you go there and you're gonna interview a politician, all the cameras run and everybody wants to get it, right? And cuidado con las cámaras, boom, moretones y de todo. So we call it el chacaleo. So I was so used to el chacaleo in Mexico, but now here's a little bit more civilized, I would say. But it's great to see here. I was born and raised in Mexico. I've been in Chicago for 16 years. I've been working in Telemundo for 14. And my passion is news. I always love to tell stories. I always said that if I can learn something new every day, that will be a goal. So I love learning something new every day, and especially sharing that with other people. Well, let's start saying that the truth is that even though Mexicans are still referenced as the most recent immigrants, Mexicans have been in Chicago for nearly 100 years. There is a rich cultural history and more than a century worth of contributions from Mexicans that have made our great city and our nation what is today. And I want to thank everybody to be here, and especially to CAN TV for covering this event. So they are being recorded. So they're right now streaming live in CAN TV channel 27 and is streaming live online at cantv.org/live. I want to thank Latino Progresando for creating MEX Talks and this space where we can come together and talk about those issues that were very important for our Latino community. It's amazing to think that looking around this room tonight and seeing so many incredible people involved in this organization that Latino Progresando started with just one man, with one phone, in a single office on 18th Street, and $200 in the bank. Some of you have been right here with Latino Progresando every step of the way. But those of you who are just getting to know the organization today can learn this. Latino Progresando runs the largest Latino-led immigration legal service program in the states of Illinois, including an initiative focused on victims of domestic violence. Latino Progresando also has Teatro Americano, a theater, ensembles, and arts education program that writes and performs the stories of Chicago Latino community, while using theater as a tool to preserve history and culture and promote social justice. Every year, Latino Progresando provides tuition assistance to the serving young students through Dr. Angela Perez Miller Scholarship Fund. And finally, Latino Progresando is a proud convener of the Marshall Square Resource Network, a 20-organization coalition working to transform Chicago's South Side. The inaugural of MEX Talks, which was launched last year in celebration of Latino Progresando's 15th anniversary, highlighted a broad range of topics addressed by speakers like Virginia Martinez. Vicky, ¿dónde estás? She's not here. Maybe she can watch us on CAN TV. Is she here? All right, so also Silvia Puente, Gary Chico, Commissioner Jesus Garcia, and tonight's host, Marty Castro. This evening, we have the unique privilege of hearing from 8 speakers representing a broad range of ages, genders, sexual orientations, profession, and reflection of the beautiful and complex tapestry that is the Mexican community. There is all here, as we're all here, to discuss the political empowerment of Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the United States. Tonight, we ask our speakers to consider one question. What if every Mexican voted? No discussion about civic engagement and the political empowerment of Mexicans in the city of Chicago or in the United States will be completed without hearing from tonight's host, Marty Castro. Marty. Here.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here for episode 2 of MEX Talks. Edgar? Thank you. As you can see, you were probably wondering why Star Wars. One, because I'm a sci-fi fan, so I guess I've just publicly outed myself. But also because really, as we were planning this event for this year, as Alba said, last year we talked about a number of areas. It was our inaugural MEX Talks, and we wanted to sort of give a smorgasbord of the various issues that affect, impact, and have been impacted by Mexicans and Mexican Americans here in Chicago. So this year we decided we were going to take a deeper dive on one of those topics, political empowerment, given what's been going on in the city, in the state, and the country over the last 365 days. And as we were talking about the theme of Mexican political empowerment, we wanted to figure out, well, how do we package that? And I believe it was Adrian Soto, I don't know if Adrian's here, as one of the committee members, came up with the idea, hey, do you remember the movie A Day Without a Mexican? Yep. Well, it was that idea that gave birth to the theme for tonight, what if every Mexican voted? Instead of being a negative, eliminating us, we're talking about actually having us participate more fully. So it was with that movie theme in mind that I decided to use this grandiose theme of Star Wars, because it is that chapter, a story that tells of rebels and tells of oppression, and ultimately there's what? The Jedi return and everything is good. So it's got that positive story at the end. And as tough as it is for us as Mexicans here, the story of our community is going to be a happy ending. And I know some of you have asked, why did we just say Mexicans? Well, first of all, when we say Mexican, we mean Mexicans, Mexican Americans, anyone of any Mexican descent, but we put Mexican up there because it's easier than putting an asterisk and saying, even though those of us are lawyers would like to see the footnote in the small print. But also, we chose and continue to choose to speak about Mexicans, not in a way to segregate or to denigrate or to in any way push away any of the other Latino communities that are also here in Chicago and throughout the nation flourishing in their own right. But just like the Puerto Rican community is proud of its heritage and its accomplishments, just like the Colombian community and all the other Latino ethnicities are proud, we as Mexicans should be proud of that. And by exploring our accomplishments, by exploring our challenges, and by working together as a Mexican community in the broadest sense of the word on making those opportunities successes, we are not excluding. We are looking to see how we, as the largest ethnic group of Latinos in the United States of America, can use that size, that power, and make this country a better place. Just as we have since the beginning of this country, just as we have at this very moment, and just as we will when we become the majority population in the United States of America. And it will happen. And I know last year, those of you who were here saw that I had a magic bag of props. You're probably wondering, where's Marty's props? Well, I do have my magic bag of props, but I have even something more special this year. I've got a special assistant who's going to help me with that, my son, Maximo Castro Rioja. Come on, Maxi. You put it down. So, in keeping with this theme that we just saw, and the fact that we have been such a growing community, the Mexican community, Latino community broadly, but again, we're 70% or more of the Latino population, depending on where you look in this country. Certainly here in Chicago and Illinois, we are the overwhelming largest number of Latinos, we as of Mexican descent. And we see that these companies are marketing to us. They're trying to sell everything from t-shirts that really take our culture and make it mainstream, or try to take over and covet our property. Here's a really cool t-shirt, which I think some of you saw on Facebook. It's Darth Vader, but in the form of a Dia de los Muertos skull. And it says, Yo soy tu padre. Yo soy tu padre. And by the way, I got one for each of the boys, so, and for Dad. But this is cool, isn't it? That's because they want us to spend our dollars. And boy, do we as Mexicans spend our dollars. We are the biggest consumers of so many things, and we are the most loyal consumers of many things. We have, in movies, for example, when you go to a theater, the number of Latinos, and again, when I say Latino, 70% of those are Mexicans. The number of Latinos and Mexicans that are going now to the movie theaters is the fastest growing population. 17% Latinos, 34% of the movie-going population. We are overrepresented in the consumption of media. We are overrepresented in the use of digital media and the consumption of that, and iPads and iPhones. We are also overrepresented in other areas of consumerism. We are the best consumers and the most loyal consumers. What we're not consuming enough of, unfortunately, as Mexicans, is consumption of the democratic process. We need to spend as much money, time, and effort involved in democracy and civics as we are in going to the movies, going to concerts, buying gym shoes, buying cool t-shirts. And you know what? Though we spend the money because they make all kinds of products for us because they want that dollar. They want that Mexican dollar. I was at Target buying this t-shirt, and there was a Mexican section. And here's Ortega taco shells, right? The Ninja Turtles. They know that our community is going to buy this because we are consumers not only of these other things, but of Latino products. Not just Latino, Mexican. There's a whole Mexican section at Target. Yet, when you look at the landscape, beyond just the consumer goods, you don't see us represented like you see us represented at the aisles at Target and Walmart and all these other places. So these gentlemen here and this lady are important to the history that we're going to talk about. I will give anyone who can guess who these people are one of these t-shirts. So who's that lady up in the corner? Does anyone know? All right, well, you win, Juan, but you're... But that's right, Irene Hernandez. Give me a large one, mijo, please. and there you go. Yes, it's Juan. Thank you, Juan. Okay, who is the gentleman in the middle with the mustache and a dapper suit? No more, Juan. Once you win a t-shirt, who is that? No. Good guess, though, the mustache, right? Anybody? Anybody? No? Okay, Max, fling it out there. Oops. I think you might have to make it into a ball. There you go. There you go, yeah. And who is the gentleman above? Who said that first? Okay. Okay, who else said it from the audience? How about not a speaker? Did anyone else say it? If not, then Larry gets it. Over there, mijo. Oh, what she said? Okay, go over there. And who is, well, what's his name? Who said that? Okay, Martin, you get a t-shirt. Now, those four people were the first Latino elected officials in Chicago and in Illinois in the 1970s and 80s. Irene Hernandez, Cook County Commissioner. Justice David Serta, who was elected ultimately as the first Latino running county-wide. Arturo Velasquez Jr., who was elected at the time the University of Illinois Board of Trustees was elected, not appointed by governor. And my dad, Ray Castro, the first Latino ward committeeman in the history of Illinois. Each of these were history. And each and every one of those 4 people were Mexican. They reflected the population of Chicago. They reflected the political empowerment of the oldest and largest population of Hispanics in the city. And a lot of their success was due to this gentleman. Who knows this person who's not a speaker or a... All right. Give her a t-shirt. Arturo Velasquez, father of art. Arturo started an organization called the Mexican American Democratic Organization, MODEL. And this was at the time of the original Mayor Daley. So no politics happened in this town without Mayor Daley's blessing. As some of you remember, Daley had told my dad he couldn't run because Mexicans didn't vote. So my dad waited till he died and ran and beat Daley's own hand-picked candidate. But Arturo Velasquez created a political organization of Mexicans and Mexican Americans, business owners, civic leaders, community activists, the church. And he helped get these folks elected because they were unified. Such that in the early, I'd say late 70s, early 80s, we started to see white candidates coming to our neighborhoods in South Chicago, Pilsen, Little Village, asking for our votes, wanting to come and tell us about how much they knew about us. And I vividly recall an event my dad took me to when I was probably as old as little Maximo here. And this candidate, I think he was running for judge, came to us in South Chicago and said, "Oh, my friends, my amigos, I'm here to tell you I'm running for judge, and I want your vote. I come here today to break taco with you." He said that, break taco with you. You know, break bread? I guess he didn't think we ate bread. Although now tortillas outsell bread, by the way. To break taco. And even as a kid, I realized, you know what, that guy doesn't know who we are. Do you think he could come and pretend to know us by saying, "I'm going to eat one of these, so you should vote for me"? But that was the caliber. That was the mentality of the people who were seeking our votes. You want some? And you know what? Yes, it's become more sophisticated today, but we still have a lot of that. People still come and try to say, "amigos for," or get up and say, "Hola, aquí estoy." You don't have to do that to try to connect to the Mexican community. What you need to do is know the issues that are important to us. Education, economic development. Yes, immigration, but we're not one-trick ponies. We care about health care. We care about everything Americans care about. And that's what we started talking about last year. And to do that, we need to get more involved. Now, this is a retrospective of 5 decades of Time magazine. And every decade, for the last 5 decades, Time magazine has said we, Latinos, and again, 70% Mexicans, Mexican Americans, we are, in 1978, the minority that will soon be the largest in the country. And all the power that that portends. 1978. Here we are today. I don't think we're very much farther than that, right, Max? And here we go now. Our good friend Edward James Olmos up there. July of 1988, right before I graduated from law school. Magnifico, Hispanic culture breaks out of the barrio. Well, where do we go? I don't know. Break out? Are we in jail? What is it? We're still trying to break out. Because the way we break out is not just in the arts, although that's important. We need to break out in politics. Because if you look at the number of elected officials we have now as Mexicans, we have a balance of trade problem in this city and in this state. But then the following decade, Time magazine, again, fall of 1993, the new face of America. Recognize that? Looks like a lot of the folks in this room. Maybe it is the new face, but that new face is not voting. So we don't see faces like that representing us in Congress like they should be, in the city council like they should be, in the 5th floor of City Hall like maybe one day they will. But one day, the next decade, June of 2001, this is a cool one, Amexica. Welcome to Amexica. See what's happening on the border. It's amazing. And come see how it's changing the world. You know, that could be today, right? That's 13 years ago. We're still waiting for that world to change. Time magazine, maybe this was the psychic issue. Maybe one day it'll happen. And of course, the one we all remember from recent times, Yo Decido. Why Latinos will pick the next president. You could say why Mexicans will, because again, the largest share of population in this country are Mexicans. Yet we're not voting at the rate we should. We're not registering at the rate we should. And even those of us that are registered, we don't come out and vote like we should. Yet we go see the movies overrepresenting our population. But we don't vote overrepresenting our population. But here, why Latinos will pick the next president. They got it right. We did pick the next president. What we failed to do was to also pick the next Congress. Because without the Congress and the president, we could throw our agenda in the garbage. So what we need to do is become much more sophisticated about our political involvement, much more sophisticated about who we support and how we support them. Because we want people elected, but we don't want anybody elected. Here we go. And for my last trick, we don't just want anybody elected. We don't just want to see a brown face or a Mexican face up there. We want to see someone that's going to do something about it. Someone who's not going to be beholden to the powers that be. Someone that is truly independent, not just says they're independent and then still has to rely on the power structure to stay there or the power structure to keep them from taking them out. We need real leadership so that we don't have a bunch of clones that are representing us in the community who, when they are told by their master, oh, we want you to do this instead of helping your community, and they'll listen to that. So, or when they want, I'll just keep that person right in my pocket. We need real independence. We don't need these toys. Right, Mox? Why don't we give them away? I'll keep the Darth Vader, actually. I forgot to tell you he's going to throw. Did you sign waivers of liability? I hope so. So as you can see, we've come a long way. And Mox throws a long way. But we have a long way to go. Ooh, what did you do, mijo? Okay. This isn't on TV, right? We have a long way to go, but we're going to get there. Because it is in coming together like we're coming together here and elsewhere in this country where we're going to talk about the power that we truly have, that force that is really within our community, and map out how we will ultimately come back and take control of opportunities that have been slipping out of our hands for decades. So thank you for being here tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else, and I'm sure you are too. Thank you.
Wow, that was wonderful. That was great. Big applause otra vez. Muy bien. That is so true. I wish I had more politicians in my iPhone so I can interview more people, because they always ask me, why do you interview all the same people? Because that's all they have. There's no more politicians, right? So just a reminder, you have in your program, there is a little card for questions. We're not going to have time for questions, but Latino Progresando organizers are going to do a blog. So could you please just keep if you want to ask your question, you just write it down, pass it to the person at the end of the aisle, and that person is going to keep it, and then a volunteer, will come and take all of those. And if you keep them, you'll be kicked out of the room. Just kidding. All right. So now it's time to listen to our next speaker. Let me give a little introduction before we start. Dr. Juan Andrade Jr. is the president of the United States Hispanic Leadership Institute, an organization that has registered 2.2 million voters, trained over 500,000 future leaders, and published 425 students on Latino demographics. Throughout his life, Dr. Andrade has done everything from selling newspapers, washing dishes, working in factories, and meatpacking plants, to working as a political commentator and columnist for major media outlets. Dr. Andrade has earned 5 degrees, including a doctorate in education from Northern Illinois University. He was recognized by both the US and Mexican governments for the performance of the exemplary deeds of service for the nation. Everyone, here's Dr. Andrade.
Can y'all hear me? Sí oye, ¿verdad? Okay. I was going to bring my hat to see if there might be some tricks in it that I could pull out, but that's not the case. What you see is what you get. And someone would say, well, I don't see much. When you hear me, you may say, we didn't get much either. But I really appreciate the presentation that we just had from Marty Castro. I could have, I would have yielded my time for him to continue because it's so good to, what he did was so important. When you get to my stage in life, you just hope that people remember what happened before. A lot of times we have a sense of the present and not a greater sense of the past. And the past has gotten us here. A lot of blood has been shed. A lot of tears have been cried, and many, many frustrations, difficulties that have had to be overcome to get us to where we are today. We're in much better shape today, despite what you see and hear. It seems like the worst of times for us, but there were times, I suppose we can argue, that were even worse. And the fact that these, like that slide that Marty put up with his dad, and Arturo Velázquez, and Art, and Irene Hernandez, and Judge Cerda, those are real pioneers. Real pioneers. And one thing that I would just add to that, not that he needs any help, but one of the things that they organized around was in 1960, they formed one of the first Viva Kennedy clubs in the United States. Y'all might remember when John F. Kennedy ran for president. Viva Kennedy clubs sprung up largely around the Southwest, but in the Midwest there was one club, and it was formed here in Chicago by these very same people. And in fact, Dr. Jorge Prieto, some of y'all hopefully will remember. If you don't remember who he was, ask your parents or grandparents. He probably delivered them when they were born because he became, already? Damn. I'm sorry, this is like TV. I forget, I think I'm in my office. But he became a naturalized citizen so that he could vote for John Kennedy. But let me just move on here then, in the interest of time, and I was glad to see Maximo here again with his dad, because I know Marty probably doesn't care that I say this, doesn't want me to say this, but I met Marty when he was about Maximo's age, back 35 years ago, almost 35 years ago when I met his father. Marty was about Maximo's age, and like Ray took Marty, Marty takes Maximo. And that's the way we create una cultura electoral. That's how we create una cultura electoral. Y si más Latinos mexicanos lo hicieran, if more Mexicanos did that, to where their parents take their children with them to meetings like this, to go and register to vote, to go and vote, we begin to create that cultura electoral que hace mucha falta in our community. I hope it's okay with y'all if I switch in and out. But it's just, that's what's really lacking. You look at other countries in Latin America to which we are often compared, and voter turnout exceeds 80%. They say, well, what happens to us in the United States? Es que en esos países, en lugares como la Isla del Encanto de Puerto Rico, es que politics is a way of life. It's passed on from one generation to the next. They live and breathe politics and elections. And if we did it here, more of us would be registered to vote, and more Mexicanos would be registered to vote today. As my children went with me, my 4 children, And they all had to report to me. I wasn't a precinct captain, but they thought I was. And on election day, they had to call Dad and say, Papa, I voted today. I said, okay, mijo, you know. And now my grandchildren call me because my children took them to go with them to register and vote. And now they call me and say, Papa, I voted today. Attaboy, you know. And that's how you create una cultura electoral where one generation educates and trains the next. Just fast forward here. What if all Mexicans voted? I thought, you know, I didn't make the connection. I didn't know that's where the connection came from about a day without Mexicans, but the same thought hit my mind. This topic for tonight sounds a little bit like that, and it's quite appropriate. And whoever came up with that, I want to commend them for that. But there's others that will follow. Is that really, that's not mine, is it? Okay. Turn your face down. Okay? It makes me nervous when I look at it. It says she's holding up 1 minute. I haven't even started yet. But if Mexicans voted, imagine what could happen in this country. In Texas today, there's 250,000 veterans who have served this country in the military. And they're not registered to vote. And almost all of them are Mexicanos. What if they registered and turned out to vote? You wouldn't have the folks, the right-wingers that we have today coming down on our community across the border there in the state of Texas. You know, and just one thing, one example, in California, with Alex Padilla having a chance to be elected Secretary of State if Mexicanos registered and voted. You know, and Antonio Villaraigosa would not have lost his first race for mayor had Mexicanos turned out to vote. The number that did not vote was very different from the number by which he lost. If even a fraction of those who didn't vote had turned out to vote, he would have won the first time and not the second time. Here in Illinois, where there's a tight race between Dick Durbin and the ice cream man, who doesn't like Mexicanos. So not even his chocolate ice cream tastes good now. You know, if Mexicanos turned out to vote in Chicago, in Illinois, Durbin would be a slam dunk. And those kind of things can happen, could happen. What could happen in American politics if Mexicanos registered and voted, it's almost like a dream. And you don't want to wake up from it, but we have to wake up and face the truth, face reality. Because there's also a dark side. There's a backside to all of this, and I would just caution you about that. Not to take any air out of this festive occasion, but one thing that I learned over the last 45 years of doing this is that we talk too much, you know, and when we're going to do something big, we go tell everybody. And I remember 30, 40 years ago, if we were going to have a registration campaign to register 5,000 Mexicanos, we would go out and register 5,000 Mexicanos, and we felt great about it. You know, and then election day, nothing changed. What happened? Well, those who don't like Mexicans knew what we were doing, so they went to register 5,000 more who didn't like Mexicans. Y se acabó. And it wasn't, and to say that it was a wash, it's an understatement. It really got worse. Because all those who did not like Mexicans turned out to vote. Many of ours didn't turn out to vote at all. You know, ganaron peor. They beat us even worse than the first time before we registered 5,000. So you can't waste time and energy and resources in registering 5,000 and telling the world, because they also have the same resources and even more to go and offset what you're doing. So what do? We go and register every Mexicano in the city of Chicago and in the state of Illinois and across America, and we don't tell anybody about it. We just don't tell. It's important that we remember that we know that we try to keep our eye on what we're doing and follow that, because it didn't just begin now. Just like with Marty's dad, Ray, 40 years ago, was working in the southeast side of Chicago. This work started long decades and decades and decades ago. And so I'm saying that to just say this: study your history. There are trends that we can follow now. USHLI itself publishes what we call the Almanac of Latino Politics. And if you've never read it, all you got to do is look it up. It gives you a 40-year history of how our population has grown over every decade over the last 40 years. How we have voted in every presidential election over the last 40 years. How we have voted in every off-year presidential election over the last 40 years. In other words, what I'm saying is there's no need to make up numbers. There's no need to make up numbers and tell people we're going to do all of this, because if you don't base that on research, then you're just setting us up to fail. And that's what happened last presidential election. The bar was set so high that the only thing that was imminent was failure. There was no way in the world, I could guarantee you, after over 40 years of doing this, that we could not possibly register as many people as we said we were going to register. It's never been done before, and it didn't happen last time. And so what happens? We didn't register as many as we thought, as many as had said that we're going to be registered. Oh, I guess Latinos or Mexicanos are apathetic. Is that the problem? Now it's our problem. Why? Well, the problem was what was predicted was unrealistic, and we couldn't step up and match that. So when the results came in, and they saw the money that was poured in to support voter registration, and the work and what was done, the results didn't change. We fell short in the results. All the money was spent. We looked bad. We don't need to look bad. We just need to be realistic about what we can do and set our minds to do it and go out and do it. And don't tell anybody that we're doing it. Háganlo en silencio. Do it undercover, tú sabes. Under the radar screen, at night if necessary, and register people to vote. That's extremely, extremely important. I remember, to close on this, that when I started with John Lewis 42 years ago, he's now a congressman, has been for 30-some years. But we had a poster that we used because most of our work was concentrated in the South, the old Confederacy, to register African Americans. John Lewis expanded that work to Texas to register Mexicans, and that's how I got involved with John Lewis. But they had a poster that showed blacks, showed African Americans picking cotton. And it said that hands that used to pick our cotton can now pick our elected officials. It's something that just resonated conmigo, because we too have done our share of the work. And we too can have a hand in electing our public officials, going forward. There's a lot of work that remains to be done, and we can do it. We need, like Marty was saying, to get involved in this. We need more volunteers. USHLI has registered 2.2 million new voters. Here in Chicago alone, all I have is college students who come in, and we send them out to naturalization ceremonies. They register as many newly naturalized citizens as they can on the run, because they don't stand around and wait for you to register them to vote, because they're excited and they want to go out and have lunch and celebrate. And we're saying, wait a minute, we got to register to vote. Ya vamos con ellos por la banqueta, just walking down the sidewalk with them. And it fills out. So where do you live? Where do you live? And just doing that in the summer for 10 weeks for the last since 2006. Now 8 years, or how long ago? That's 8 years. Those students have registered 136,000 newly naturalized citizens. Never said a word about it. Didn't tell anybody. We did not submit a proposal, to raise money to support voter registration. We just went out and did it quietly. Quietly. Silencio is the word, because we can talk a lot, we can say a lot, but as we've learned over the years, when all is said and done, more was said than done. So no digan nada, nomás háganlo y avéntense, ¿ok? Gracias por todo.
It's great. So when I was also reflecting about that question, what if every Mexican voted? And then I was just thinking about my very boring Sorry, this is moving. My very boring roommate in college. Hey, let's go to the party. Why am I going? I don't know anybody there. Just like, yeah, you go because you're gonna meet people there, right? Like, it's like, why am I voting if I don't know any candidate? I don't know anybody. I don't know what they do. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they are for. And that's what I think information is so important. And that's why I think one of our goals also in Telemundo is trying to inform people who the candidates are, what are they for? Do you like this one? Do you like the other one? It's up to you. You go vote, but here's the information we're gonna give you so you make an educated choice. All right, so let's keep rolling. Our next speaker is Xochitl Bada. Xochitl is a professor in the Latin American and Latino Study program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her work has been focused primarily on the civic, cultural, and political participation of Chicago-based Mexican migrant hometown associations. She has contributed to and edited a number of publications throughout her career. And her most recent work, a book titled Mexican Migrant Hometown Association in Chicahuacan, love it, will soon be printed by Rutgers University Press. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Xochitl Bada.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. I just need to make a very quick correction to the bio because otherwise my editor is going to kill me. The book is out since April of 2014. And it's Mexican Hometown Associations in Chicahuacan, from local to transnational civic engagement, Rutgers University Press. I hope you buy it. So thank you very much again to the organizers to this wonderful event. I am very excited to be here and share with you an answer to the question that was posed to me that is a little bit twisting the question in terms of why is it that Mexican immigrants, even after naturalizing as United States citizens, seem to be very much engaged in these hometown associations and federations. So I guess the question from the host is like whether or not this active binational civic engagement is detracting Mexican immigrants into being more fully incorporated in the civic and social life of the United States. So let me share with you a little bit of what I know so far on this issue. After taking almost a decade observing the participation of hometown associations, not only in the city of Chicago, but across the United States. So the first thing, I hope to accomplish two goals in the very limited amount of time that I have. First, I would like to demystify the idea that I've been hearing thus far from Marty and from Juan, that political participation is only accomplished by the voting booth. I hope you leave this room with the idea that this is not the only way to participate. And it's not a panacea, it's not a magic bullet that once you go and fold this neatly nice piece of paper and put it there, the next day we are all gonna be happy Mexicans with rights and like politicians are gonna obey all the demands. It's not that quickly and not that simple. And the second thing that I hope to accomplish in this very little time is that you are gonna be able to embrace the potential of binational civic engagement, which basically means that Mexican immigrants will have the opportunity to be active citizens in more than one nation state. Let's, in this case, be the United States of America and Mexico as well. And why this matters, and why this is not a contradiction, this is not bigamy, this is not like not being loyal to a nation, why this matters, why it's important. Okay, so one example of like how people came together and was telling U.S. society like the participation is not only exercised through the voting booth. This, a very good example that we have is 2006 immigrant marches that happened here in Chicago and across 250 cities across the United States, in which 6 to 7 million Latinos went out to the streets to demand rights as dignity, rights as immigrants, that they really wanted to participate in the social fabric, and they did it peacefully, very importantly. So one of the most important slogans that still resonates today is that across the US, most marchers had this uniform message saying, today we march, tomorrow we vote. We have yet until in 2014 to materialize this promise, and hopefully it's not going to become empty vacuum noise that people keep on saying, yeah, but when is going to be the tomorrow? When are they voting? They are still not registered and they are behind. Naturalizations are not enough still. So, but why? Why like this community? You have heard that, yeah, they are not registered and they do not participate enough. But let me remind you that this is a community that for more than 100 years, the Mexican Americans in the United States have been disenfranchised. And they have been disenfranchised from the only political system many of them have belonged to, which is Mexico. Remember that for 70 years, more than 70 years, one-party rule dominated in Mexico, which make very non-interesting to vote while they were living there. So after they moved here, it happens that they became instantly disenfranchised because for a very long time, Mexico did not allow them to vote in Mexican elections. It's only until 2006, which looks like yesterday, that Mexicans living in the United States were allowed to go to the voting booth and elect Mexico's president. Okay? And yet the disenfranchisement was also present in the United States because many, while became legal permanent residents, were not given the tools and were not invited by politicians and by the local civic leaders to actually become part and parcel of US society. After 1986, when President Reagan was in power, it was the last time that there was an enormous, like a structured push to give out NGOs money, millions of dollars, to actually invite green card holders to take the test, to become naturalized citizens, to go to these classes, citizenship classes, so that they could become interested. Because it's not naturally that people are going to decide, yes, now tomorrow I'm going to present this test, because this test, unfortunately, is still a literacy test for those who came after 1965. So what they are testing here is the level of literacy. And for those of you who know Mexico, you know that literacy rates have been improving, but only in the last 2 decades. Many of the immigrants who came right after or right before 1965 were vastly illiterate. And now you are asking them to answer 300 and plus questions about the sophisticated political system. It's not as simple as, no, they do not want to naturalize, they do not want to become citizens. It's that there are real barriers. Some are explicit and others hidden that have a lot to do with their opportunities for passing such a naturalization test. But the good news is the triumph of the numbers, but the important challenge here is to make them count for important relationships and to increase the bilateral positive relations in these two great nations, Mexico and the United States. So what are some, I want to share quickly with you some of the consequences of having here in Chicago the second largest Mexican population in the entire United States, okay? So what happens when you have this very large population that is plus, like 1 million plus living in Chicago metro area? There are important economic consequences to that. So now Mexico is Illinois' third largest international market for inbound travel. In 2012, the total Illinois-Mexico trade totaled $15 billion US, and Illinois ranked number 6th among the 50 states for exports to Mexico. Mexico is now Illinois' second largest export market, okay? So this is really important numbers. There is a lot to be done for increasing the participation, but binational migrant civic engagement offers Mexican immigrants the possibility of a social education experience to act collectively for common ends without the constraints of formal political participation that requires citizenship status to vote in US elections. And some of them do not have the freedom of mobility to vote in Mexican elections either, because you still need to have a voting card to vote in Mexican elections, and for getting the voting card, you need to pay a plane ticket to Mexico. And only those with the privilege of papers, also known as dual citizens, de jure and de facto, are those who can exercise those rights. So still, enfranchisement becomes, like, still materializes with lots of caveats in this sense. Okay, so it's very important to connect these immigrants with institutions that are ethnic, such as hometown associations, that can bridge these two societies and that help them make the transition to the US society. So I want to close by telling you the vast diversity of the membership that these hometown association members belong to. They not only do projects in Mexico, but here in the United States, they are leaders at soccer and other sports clubs. They are members of faith-based moral communities. They belong to parent-teacher organizations, to local school councils in Chicago public schools. They are members and leaders of the Democratic Party, of the GOP as well, and political action committees. They do myriad of things. And so economically, I'm gonna finish with the last bit of statistics that to me is very shocking when you wanna measure the total impact of the more than 1,000 hometown associations that exist across the entire United States. Let me finish with this piece of information. Between 2002 and 2007, hometown associations contributed between 30 million and 40 million US dollars annually for infrastructure development. And this amount is similar to that contributed to Mexico by private US foundations. And here I include Ford, Rockefeller, MacArthur, and many more as those, okay? So in contrast, in the year of 2009, Mexico received approximately $11 million in development assistance from the United States Agency for International Development, the so-called USAID, which is equivalent to less than 1% from the total official aid Mexico received from the US government that year. So I hope that you end up wondering what happened with the other 99% of official aid that the US sends to Mexico. You know what? This 99% of official aid is invested in one thing, the Merida Initiative. And that means drones, airplanes, military equipment, and training for drug cartels. And this will never attack root causes of migration. So this will never help for living in a world where migration is only one option, but not the only one. Thank you.
Okay. One of the rules for journalism that I follow when I cover politics, follow the money. That's one. It's a good one. You can see, who is who or who is doing, but when you follow the money is when you find out all the PACs, all the power. So just gonna leave it like that. So are we as Latinos, are we as Mexican Americans here contributing to campaign? I don't know. That's something that maybe we can find out if that is one of the issues that could be affecting, elections or benefiting elections for us. So don't forget about your cards. It's important to write your question and pass it to the person at the end of the line so they can Latino Progresando volunteers can do the blog. All right? So common sense immigration reform is such an important issue in our community, and reform is something that we need. As the larger immigration legal providers in Illinois, Latino Progresando have developed a platform for incremental reforms, small fixes with a huge impact. And a copy of this information will be included in your program. So we invite you to read, and if you want to make a comment or if you want to ask a question as well, don't forget to write it down on your piece of paper. So we have two young women, both of whom migrated from Mexico to the United States at very young age, overcoming many obstacles, but valuing above all else their education, their community, and culture. Both Maria Gonzalez and Marta Razo have already achieved so much. Maria recently graduated from Illinois Institute of Technology. She has been instrumental in the rise of campus and national organization in the undocumented youth advocate movement. Marta, a current student at IIT, working towards a degree in applied mathematics, has also been key to advocacy efforts, and I remember because I did a story about that. As part of Latinos Progresando, Teatro Americano Ensemble, she learned to use theater as a tool to promote social justice. Marta also started a scholarship fund at her high school to support other undocumented students. Please hear from Maria and Marta.
Hello, everyone. I would like to introduce myself in the way that I learned after a meeting with the Immigrant Youth Justice League back in 2010. This actually brought me a feeling of freedom and community that I didn't have before. My name is Maria, and I am undocumented. I am also the recipient of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but that is not permanent. My experience as an undocumented student is permanent. Today, Martha and I will be coming out of the shadows again. I remember my childhood full of joy, living in Mexico City. I remember the season leading to Dia de los Muertos. I remember markets full of the sugar skulls, full of papel de cempasúchil. I mean, the papel picado, you know, the one to decorate. I also remember the flor de cempasúchil, actually, the smell of it. This is a memory that I just cannot get rid of. I am in love with my culture, and I cannot get rid of this longing to one day be able to experience it again. My dad had to migrate to the United States when I was 3 years old. 5 years after, he went back to Mexico because he wanted to be with his family. But he couldn't find any opportunities or any jobs. So my family had to make the hard decision to move to the United States. This was one of the hardest decisions they had to ever make. They did not know if they were going to be able to go back to Mexico and see their family ever again. Once in the United States, I worked hard and was given the opportunity to study in a private high school. I was very excited to be able to visit this high school, but little did I know that that day I was going to go back home close to tears. When I was in the high school, I was encountered by this school professional, this school representative. But once I told them about my status, they told me that they couldn't accept children like me in a very derogatory manner. This person's attitude, this person's way of telling me things made me realize as a child what my life was going to be as an undocumented immigrant in this country. After the attacks of 9/11, the FBI raided my house. They were looking for my father, who was working at the Sears Tower. He was working as a cook, and to them, he was a criminal. He was a potential terrorist because he was working without proper identification. His was not the only case. Many other workers' families were raided by the FBI. But there was something different in some of his families. They had U.S. citizen children. Some of these people were able to attain a legal status because of the psychological damage done to U.S. citizen children. But there was nothing, there was no compensation done or given to any undocumented children or families of these undocumented children.
My name's Marta Razo, and I'm undocumented. My parents came to the United States seeking the glamorous and promising American dream. They wanted their Martita to become a professional, to go to college, for us to have better living conditions. But it was all an illusion. It was a nice landscape drawn into our minds. But the reality was a truckload full of limitations driving our way. In 2006, When the leaves of the trees started changing shades of color, the counselor started talking about college. I always knew I wanted to pursue higher education. Then she mentioned FAFSA, government financial aid for only US citizens. Oh crap, I was an immigrant. In back of my head, echoed my mother's words, don't say you're illegal, in fear of being separated from our family. Yet, I raised my hand and I asked the counselor, what if I'm an immigrant? In a hostile tone, she said, good luck. You know what? You can't even be in this country. You can't even get money. Why are you here? There is when I felt like a glass broke and it cut through my skin, breaking and piercing through my dreams. Since then, I realized that the world was a cold place where I could no longer be hopping around, motivated to learn tons. Since then, I've been living limitations. Limitations have been pressing on me and my family, continuous no's and rejections. 2 years ago, que en paz descanse, my grandmother died of cancer. My father has been whipped, has been kicked, and has been left crippled after that experience. He was not able to go see his mom. The only way he had her close was hearing her voice breaking over the phone. All we wanted to do is be next to her, be able to embrace her. We couldn't go leave flowers at her grave. Come on, we just want the opportunity to see our loved ones. At least see them before they pass away. Not being separated by a freaking border created by some cold-hearted leaders who act as if they don't have a family. But you know what? I'm not going to stop because the government does not support me financially. You know what? I have research options for undocumented students to go into higher education. I presented to hundreds of students at Curie High School. After that, I took a further step and I decided, well, I have to contribute, not just only talk about it and present. Like one of our speakers said, we talk too much, right? And we shouldn't talk too much. What shows more is our actions. So I decided, well, I'm gonna raise funds for undocumented students. Even if every dollar that I have to get cost me like I wouldn't get paid, that doesn't matter. It comes from my heart because I live this. So I created a scholarship fund called Students for Students. I raise money with other youth. Besides that, I keep raising awareness via theater, via activist work. And I think best of all is that I set as an example. I'm a Latina studying at Illinois Institute of Technology, pursuing higher education, third year, applied math, which is weird. But I did not do this alone. I always had a community, a support network behind me, and I feel very lucky and fortunate about that.
So I had to take a year and a half off after graduating high school. I had to do this to be able to work full-time, to then enroll at one of the city colleges of Chicago part-time. Once I was enrolled at Harold Washington, I thought I was the only undocumented student. This is a very common story. But I was actually wrong. After a class, I asked my professor if I could give a presentation on the DREAM Act. Very excited. She was so excited to ask me, are you undocumented? Because if you are, there's so many opportunities for you. Meeting Marité actually changed my life. After giving the presentation on the DREAM Act, I decided to come out in front of my classroom. I decided to tell everyone my personal story as an undocumented immigrant. I was in front of a class full of tears, including Marité. I still remember that day. I did not know that doing this would actually open many doors full of opportunities. During the same time at UIC, the students were fighting to stop the deportation of a fellow student. He was also enrolled at Harold Washington College. Meeting them brought me once again the sense of community. I was witnessing youth defy all odds to try and stop the deportation of someone who many refused to actually help and instead criticized. Eventually, I co-founded the U.S. Leadership Scholarship at Harold Washington College. Once again, I did not do this alone. I did it with my community of fellow students. I talked about my status with great ease since I was never told to fear or to hide. Because of this, someone recommended I apply to IIT and even helped me face my fear of the application process. I was scared of being rejected again, but I was afraid because I did not want to relieve that rejection due to my status. It did not matter to me that I had a 4.0 GPA and a recommendation from the president of the school. I was a slave of the dream narrative. I burned out and got sick for 2 weeks without being able to go to school, all out of fear of not fitting that perfect image, that perfect description of what a dreamer is. I was scared of not being this perfect student deserving of legalization through the DREAM Act.
Hearing both of our stories, you might think, well, they worked very hard, so they deserve an opportunity. Also, in us is reflected the student of excellence who, regardless any difficulties, would overcome any barrier, right? So we deserve legalization, correct? But what about those students who were not lucky enough like us? What about those students that did not live in the environment that allowed them to pursue higher education? What about those that were not able to wear a cap and gown? How about those who were not lucky to be guided by someone, supported by someone? How about those that couldn't bear with the disappointment, the depression, or the pain? Do they deserve legalization? Do they fit into that perfect image of what a dreamer is? Approximately 65,000 undocumented students in the United States graduate from high school, but only 5 to 10% of them go to college. How many do you think actually complete college?
I refuse to be called a dreamer. I refuse to be tokenized and put on a pedestal because I was fortunate enough to meet the right people at the right time. I refuse to be a tool of oppression for my community. Yes, I work hard, but so have others who had to also work even harder to be able to support families because they couldn't find any other ways. But how can they go on to college when there are such limited amount of scholarships, when we cannot receive federal aid, when even these scholarships require you to be one of the top students? How many top students can there be? How can everyone in this situation be one of those top students when even these scholarships require you to be so perfect? I would like to ask you all to consider this dreamer term. I know that this term has been used as a political strategy to bring attention and to bring support for the undocumented youth to gain legalization. But it seems like we are only supporting that 5 to 10%. What about the 90 to 95%? They do not complete this checklist of perfection. This term not only makes others feel sorry for us, it also criminalizes our community. If I do not fall under this perfect term of the dreamer, do I then deserve to be deported? I was brought to this country as a child of no fault of my own. This is what we keep hearing again and again by politicians trying to bring legalization to the undocumented youth. If I deserve this opportunity because of this, if I was brought by no fault of my own, then whose fault is it? My parents? No.
The immigration community continues to be terrorized and oppressed. We're part of a permanent underclass. Our parents and those youth who were not fortunate to apply to deferred action, they're still being hunted by this system's thirsty for profit and for money. However, those that were fortunate to apply to deferred action, they still are not free. They still have to deal with the fear that one day their parents could be separated from them. Family separation continues. Worst, children are held in cages in overcrowded places. Prisoners, immigrants are being paraded outdoor detention centers. We're treated unhumanly. We're being called illegal as a way to criminalize us.
But when our community has been oppressed for so long, then we need to take action. Like as long as that we use during rallies says, when our community is under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back. During Obama's campaign for re-election, big organizations were scared to pressure Obama to pass legislation to give relief to our community. But the undocumented youth decided to take action. They wanted relief. These youth organized sit-ins in Obama's offices all over the country. And on June 15, the first action was passed. Well, it was announced. The fight is not over, even though DACA was passed, because there is still this quota in detention centers to fill beds. And in reality, DACA meant relief for some, but then these quotas meant that the concentration of ICE was actually going to go to persecute our parents and the rest of our families. Under Obama, around 400,000 people have been deported, more than during Bush administration. This is why I decided to participate into civil disobediences, because my family was still at risk, because our community continues to be oppressed and persecuted. Obama has the power to give relief to our community, and he needs to do it now. Despite all of this pain and struggle, students like Marta and I have been able to have our work pay off. But we were lucky. Some others are not. It took a community for me to be able to graduate this past May. It took a community to pass DACA, and it has taken a community to stop deportations one by one.
So we can't vote, but like someone said, this movement is like the human body. It requires every part to function. So if you could vote, you must vote. And if you can't, you must be involved in this movement. If we want our human rights to be respected, we have to come together as a community. We need you, and we need your support, because you matter, and all of us matter.
That was great. Wonderful. So we're going to try to go a little bit faster this time. And we have a lot of people to thank for making this event possible. We, Latino Progresando, would like to thank the Chicago Community Trust, Dot Press, Hoy, the largest Spanish language daily newspaper in Chicago, serving the community for more than 10 years. Can TV, who is now live streaming MEX Talks online and live screening on Channel 27. And Telemundo, we're very proud also to be supporting this event as well. Un aplauso muy grande para todos los que apoyan. Well, now we have Linda Xochitl Tortolero. Linda's professional career has been rooted 10% in community service, working in nonprofit administrations and fundraising in a number of Chicago-based organizations, including the National Museum of Mexican Arts and Mujeres Latinas en Acción. She also spent time working at the Nellie Mae Education Foundation as Proteus Fund Diversity Fellow. And today, Linda is the Director of Development at the Association House. She has earned degrees from Brown University and Northwestern University School of Law. Let's welcome Linda Tortolero to the stage.
In October 2013, at the 13th Annual International Book Fair, Elena Poniatowska stated, "With education, Mexico will be taken out of its hole." She was absolutely right. But the truth is the same here in the United States. Education is the answer for the future of Mexican American communities. It can help our families rise out of poverty and be able to take advantage of socioeconomic opportunities and to lead happier lives. Education has played a very great role in my life. I've had the opportunity to grow up in a family of teachers. Knowledge and curiosity have fueled me since I was a child. My parents' and grandparents' homes had books everywhere. Agatha Christie books, Reader's Digest books, encyclopedias, almanacs. Books were taking over the house. We had nonfiction books on everything from history to religion to philosophy and poetry. I remember once reading a short article in our third grade school social studies book about Savannah, Georgia, and the beautiful homes there. That day, I went home and looked up Savannah in our Compton Encyclopedia. That's what we used to do before we had Wikipedia. See, sometimes I love to share and learn facts that I know that are very, very random because I come from a family of teachers. My siblings and I were surrounded by a rich and supportive learning environment that encouraged our educational growth and our development. We were very fortunate kids. For most Mexicans and too many young people in our country, however, access to a well-rounded education is a privilege and not a right. Too many of our public schools do not have the necessary resources to foster the innate human desire to know and to learn. The state of US public education is in crisis, but still, for Mexicans living in Mexico, the United States is a world of opportunity. The education interest is the #1 interest of all Latinos in the United States, and many emphasize it's one of extreme importance. Latinos have the highest birth rate of any racial or ethnic group in the United States. 1/3 of the Latino population is under the age of 13. Have you noticed the almost overnight explosion of neverias or Mexican ice cream shops in Chicago? Kids don't need to wait for summer anymore or to hear the chime of the paletero's bell. The Pew Research Center found that Mexicans have lower levels of education than the Latino population overall. Some 10% of Mexicans ages 25 and older have obtained at least a bachelor's degree, as compared to 13% of US Latinos. The high school dropout rate remains alarming. About 59% of Mexicans born in Mexico have not earned a high school diploma, as compared to 21% of Mexicans born in this country. Mexicans born in the US are almost 3 times more likely to have earned a bachelor's degree than those born in Mexico. So US-born Mexicans do have more access to educational opportunities, but the numbers graduating college are still too low. With the Mexican-American population growing at a faster rate compared to the Mexican immigrant population, we can assume the prioritization of education will continue to increase. Let's keep in mind that Mexicans make up 10% of the total US population. Without higher investment in public education, the following will result: the loss of future generations of Mexican professionals and Mexican dynamic entrepreneurs, Mexicans without the requisite skills to be able to find employment that provides them and their families a livable wage. In short, there will be greater levels of poverty in the United States and even higher rates of US income inequality, which has been the big buzz in the political world right now. Our government and civic society have neglected public education for far too long. Without a serious reversal in our commitment to adopt new laws and support new policies to benefit the education of our children and youth, the US will continue to lose its global competitiveness. Our industrialized democratic peers have invested more significantly in public education than we have, and that we will continue to lose our growth in comparison to these peers. We must change our course. Can the US afford to ignore 10% of its population? No, it can't. An increased number of Mexican American voters can have a tremendous impact on the adoption of educational policies advantageous to our children. I want our kids to have the advantages I had. I had a privileged upbringing. But like many of my peers, I'm tired of being the only Mexican and Latina in the boardroom, the corporate office, the museum, the contemporary dance performance, the study abroad program, the think tank, and more. It's lonely. Don't we want to see more Mexicans in these spaces? We need to make sure that our voice and our vote follow our interests. We need greater public investment in higher education. We need to look at the student loan debt crisis that's a growing challenge for Mexican professionals and Mexican parents who want to be able to support their children to actually go to school. I love to complain about my student loans. I'm sure there are many of you like that right now in the room. 38% of my salary after income tax goes towards loan payments, 38. This is the new reality of an increasing amount of US college graduates. In fact, I'm gonna throw a party once I'm done with my private loans. I'll let you know if you're invited. Government loans, long way off. Seriously, I don't regret taking loans. I have the money to pay them back, and sacrifices can be made. But what about those who can't pay them back? So we should consider policy solutions, such as lowering government loan interest rates or eliminating loan interest for those who can't afford them. Also, have you guys noticed public university tuition has escalated? We need to increase state and federal funding for greater tuition subsidies and scholarships. And while we're at it, we should make sure that undocumented students can qualify for that in-state tuition that all of us can who have citizenship. Getting into college is a great achievement. I mean, for me, it was a given. But graduating college is a bigger one, and it remains a tremendous challenge for too many of our young people. I will tell you a personal story. When I was at Brown University, we had a graduation ceremony for Latinos. And at this ceremony, another Latino or a friend of yours would come up and tell you about, why they're so proud of you. So all my friends who were Latino, they had somebody go, but you were amazing because so-and-so died in El Paso and you had to go back home and you came back and you still finished. Or so-and-so, would say, I can't believe you work 25 hours a week while you're going to Brown University. Like, that's amazing, I went up there and my friend Artemio, who was the first person in his family to go to college, he was up and he was talking about how much I helped him. I mean, I think that was the first time I realized how lucky I was because nobody got sick back in Mexico. I didn't have to stop working to support my family. The only thing I really had to do was study. And so I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. So for those who are in college, we need to make sure we have tutoring services for those students who are already academically behind. Because I will tell you, I went to a prep school. I did well in prep school, but you can't compare a kid who went to prep school to a kid who was in the top school in a neighborhood school in East LA. You're not ready for Brown yet, and that's what's sad. And it's not just Mexicans, it's a host of other children, young people who face that. So we need support services for those kids who are going away from home for the first time, and they find themselves in this economically privileged environment where not everybody's Mexicano, and they need to be able to fit in, and we need to help them do that. But we also can't forget about the young kids. There are huge learning gaps for Mexican children before they even start kindergarten. So we have to make sure that we invest in early childhood programs to encourage early literacy, math, and social skills necessary for their long-term success. So to do that, we need more school counselors for early interventions for students who face challenges that interfere with their learning, financial aid counselors to assist students to navigate FAFSA and lessen the fears about the college admissions process. Let's support the implementation of partnerships between public schools and community not-for-profits for faster referrals and stronger linkages to support our students. Something I'm especially passionate about, and that doesn't get a lot of press, is eliminating harsh disciplinary policies. There are some school districts in this country where if for 3 times in a row you're caught wearing the wrong kind of sweater, or you didn't bring the right kind of utensils to your class, you're gonna get kicked out. I mean, that's ridiculous. And that actually places Mexicanos at a higher dropout risk and being pushed out of school. And we can't forget about bilingual ed or dual language schools. Bilingual education has been found to lead to superior outcomes for Mexican youth. Dual language schools increase the social capital of Mexican students who may feel that their culture is not held at equal esteem to mainstream culture. Students of Mexican heritage should be encouraged to learn or maintain their or their parents' native language and should have access to instruction in a second language. If kids with more economic resources can flourish in a language immersion or dual language program, learning Mandarin or French, and they're not Mandarin speaking or they're not French speaking at home, why shouldn't Mexican kids in back of the yards, Fresno, East LA, North Carolina, East Boston have the same exposure and be able to learn Spanish or another language? What about the elimination of arts and culture education in our schools? The cutting of arts has happened very much in low-income city neighborhoods like ours, where we live. Let's reinvest in bringing back these visual art and performing arts classes instead of cutting arts programs. Classes about Mexican arts and culture increase a Mexican student's sense of identity, increase the chances that she'll be more engaged in school, and it will help her succeed academically. So our kids need the arts. It's not a luxury. Without question, the schools in our neighborhoods simply need more resources. but we also need to have closer access to magnet or selective top schools for our communities. Why is it that the great majority of top selective Chicago public high schools are on the north side, when most Mexicans live on the south side? Why do our kids have to take the bus longer to get to these schools? What are we going to do about that? So first, as Juan said, let's stop talking and let's do something. Let's make sure that we vote our interests and not just voice them. First, register to vote. Second, find out what candidates think about the education issues that concern you. Inform your elected officials about education issues that you're passionate about. Donate money. This is the world of Citizens United. If you have money, it doesn't matter if it's $5, and if you have $1 million, yes, please do that too. Donate to education advocacy. I raise money for a living, so I have no qualms asking people for money. Donate to education advocacy groups and service organizations that work towards policies and programs that benefit young people. Understand the importance of public spending to education and how your tax dollars are allocated to these investments. Vote. It's not enough just to register, you gotta actually vote. Identify and partner with allies who seek improved education policies. We're not alone. Overwhelmingly, communities of color, working class and middle class families are concerned about the decline of US education. Imagine just for a moment, if there were as many registered Mexican voters in the state of Arizona as there are Mexicans living there. The ban that was made by the Arizona State Legislature on ethnic studies may have never happened, and it would have not affected the Mexican American Studies program that was in the Tucson Public School District. That was then upheld by the Federal District Court. Now we have to wait for the Ninth Circuit to decide on that controversial ban. Imagine if we had those Mexicans registered to vote. Would that even have been possible? Mexicans must play a critical role in changing the course of US education policy. For the future of our country, we must carve that path for the future generations of Mexicans. Gracias.
That's great. You know, there's one thing about the Latino family values that I cannot very happy about. And one of them is, for example, when the girl gets that scholarship that she wanted, and she gets all paid. She's all the way to Minnesota, North Dakota, and then the mom says, ay, no, pobrecita. No, como no va a haber tamales allá, como no. Mejor te quedas aquí. I've seen that many, many times. My husband works in a high school, and it's frustrating for the teachers to see that. I think we have to let go, like Americans do. He's 18 years old. Go ahead. It's not that I'm sure they don't love their kids, but it's time to go. And I think if we are do the tough love and understand that our children need that, maybe it will be a little bit different as well. Well, now I have the distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jorge Valdivia. He's a trailblazer in Chicago Latino LGBTQ community. While he was with the National Museum of Mexican Art, Jorge funded Homofrecuencia, the first Spanish language LGBT-focused radio program in the United States. And 2 years later, hosted the first Latino queer prom. His work has earned him a number of recognitions, including induction into the Chicago Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame. Please join me to welcome Jorge Valdivia.
Gracias. Good evening. Buenas noches. How's everyone doing tonight? It's a lot more comfortable when you're sitting down there and you get up here, you forget everything that you're about to talk about. So luckily I have one of these to help me throughout the evening. So my name is Jorge Valdivia, and I'd like to take this moment to thank Latinos Progresando for inviting me to form part of MEX Talks 2014. It's an honor for me to be in the company of so many other Mexicanas that I admire and respect. Gracias. So I've been asked to talk about lessons from the gay and lesbian community that can be implemented within our community as Mexicanos as we work to address issues that are important to us. I'm going to tell you a story about a Mexican that makes me incredibly proud. But before I do so, I'd like to play a promo of Homofrecuencia.
Freddie Martínez Jr., asesinado el 16 de junio 2001. Edgar Garzón, asesinado el 15 de agosto 2001. Gwen Araujo, asesinada el 3 de octubre 2001. Bella Evangelista, asesinada el 6 de agosto 2003. Lo hacemos por ellos y muchos más quienes fueron asesinados por el simple hecho de ser gay, lesbiana, transgénero, bisexual, ser humano, homofrecuencia.
Thank you. So that was a typical Monday night of what you could listen to on Homofrecuencia. Homofrecuencia, as Alba mentioned earlier, was the first Spanish language LGBT radio show in U.S. history. Let me repeat that for you. Mexicanos in Pilsen made history, but not many people know that. You know why? Because we're not doing a very good job of telling our story. That needs to change. Give me a second here. Out of Homofrecuencia, a lot of stories emerged. I've chosen one in the interest of time to share with you this evening. This is Felipe's story. Shortly after we started airing Homofrecuencia, a student from our sister program, Yo Locali, came to my office and he knocked on the door. I saw him standing outside through the glass panel and I said, "Come in." He said, "Hi. You don't know me, my name's Felipe, but I was hoping that we could talk." I said, "Sure." Felipe stood there, nervous. He stared back at the door, looked back at me, and I could tell that he wanted some privacy. It was a look that I recognized many times before. So I asked him, "Do you want some privacy?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, close the door. Let's talk." And he said, as he stood there, twiddling his thumbs nervously, looking down at the floor, and then staring at me, he said, "I just wanted to thank you." And I said, "Thank me?" He caught me off guard. I said, "Thank me for what?" He said, "I wanted to thank you for doing Homofrecuencia." He caught me off guard. I said, "Felipe, you don't have to thank me." He said, "But I do," he interrupted politely. "You see, I just came out to my mom, and it didn't go very well. We're not talking." His voice began to crack. His eyes got red, and he started crying. That moment was an affirmation that launching Homofrecuencia was the right thing to do. It was because of people like Felipe that we decided to launch a program like that. What we were doing was building a sense of community for people, Mexicanos, Latinos, who felt disconnected. When you think about the gay and lesbian community, it's located on the north side of Chicago. In order for us to feel comfortable back then, we had to take 2 buses, 2 trains, just so we can express ourselves freely. Why not create visibility for our community where we are, donde estamos? Homofrecuencia paved the way for a new generation of Latino gay, lesbian, queer activists. We were forging our identity and saying, this is where we are, in La Villita, in Pilsen, and this is who we are. It was just the beginning. 2 years after, we started the Latino Queer Prom. It was the first Latino Queer Prom in the country and the largest queer prom in Chicago. But again, not many people know that. You know why? Because we're not doing a good job of telling our entire story. That's the thing. We need to begin to take ownership of our entire story. Not that the gays and lesbians or Mexicanos that happen to be gays and lesbians are telling their story here, but one community telling one story that involves everyone. Do you understand the power in that? The thing is, if we don't do that, someone else is going to tell our story for us. Or even worse, someone else will take credit for the things that we've already done. I don't know about you, but I can't allow that to happen. So when I was asked to talk about lessons from the LGBTQ community that can be implemented within the Mexican community as we work towards addressing some of these issues, I thought about 2 different issues. 1, marriage equality, and 2, immigration reform. So when I was thinking about marriage equality, I decided to meet with one individual who was behind the movement from the very beginning here in Illinois. We talked, and then I reached out to him because I respect him and because he was involved from the very beginning. So these are some of the things that we decided were appropriate to discuss this evening, and I hope you find them just as valuable. Number 1, we need to understand that the enemy of the gay and lesbian community is the same enemy of the Mexican, Latino, immigrant community. When we understand that, there's so much power behind that. It provides an opportunity for us to talk among one another and form an even stronger alliance. Another thing that we discussed that day was accountability for corporations and media. How many here have heard about the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, GLAAD? Good, good. So let me tell you something. GLAAD serves as a media watchdog group for the gay and lesbian community. Anytime anyone attacks us, we go after that person. Anytime anyone attacks us in the media, rather, we go after that person. And we ask them to apologize. And if they don't, this is what happens. We go after the media outlet. And the media, 9 times out of 10, will issue an apology distancing themselves from that individual. That individual will be reprimanded or fired. It happens. And if that doesn't work, we go after we hit them where it hurts. We go after the corporate sponsors. We all know that money talks, but when money walks, people change their tune. Here's my question to each and every single one of you. Who out there is ensuring that Mexicanos, Latinos, and the immigrants are being portrayed in a positive light? We need an organization to emerge to ensure that they're telling our story the way we choose our story to be told. We need to make it very clear to them that we will no longer tolerate terms like illegal, anchor baby, taking our jobs. That needs to change, and we need to be proactive about that. This organization can meet with editorial boards across the state on a national level, do trainings, again, about how the message needs to be crafted, how we decide for our story to be told. Another thing that worked within the gay and lesbian community was, again, as we're talking about marriage equality at the state level, we worried about the votes that we didn't have and not the votes that we had. What do you mean by that, Jorge? Well, here's the thing. We looked at politicians that were on the fence or against marriage equality, and we drafted a map, and we said, okay, they're here, they're here, they're here. Now, let's do this. Let's look for same-sex couples that live in their districts. Let's have them meet with these politicians. Let's look for nuns and priests who support marriage equality. They do exist. You're like scratching your head like, really? They do. We had them meet with these politicians, and not all of them, but just enough to make marriage equality in Illinois change their position. Here's the thing. When people come out of the closet, when people come out and accept who they are, and they begin to talk about some of the challenges that they're faced with, it resonates with family members, with friends. That is the greatest form of activism that we can do. And I'd like to challenge us as Mexicanos to begin to come out of the closet as immigrants, undocumented. It's happening already, yes. But let's take things a step further. Let's look at marriage equality. If you think about it, the language changed quickly. Let's just think about this. Gay marriage was a term that was first being used, correct? Sí or no? It went from gay marriage to same-sex marriage to marriage equality. What was important here was for us to come up with a message that resonated with people outside the gay and lesbian community. When you take away the sexuality, it's about love. And everybody's capable of loving, hopefully, right? So that resonated with non-LGBT individuals, and public opinion began to shift. And what we saw was, little by little, state by state, marriage equality became a reality. We're not done yet. We have a lot of work to do. But these are some of the lessons that we can implement. Another thing, this is a term that I'd like to introduce tonight. Allies. This is a term that is used a lot within the gay and lesbian community. I hardly ever hear it mentioned within our Mexican community. Let's begin to look at ways, let's think about this for a moment. Let's begin to look at ways of how we can turn our enemy into an ally. How do we do that? We, again, come up with a message that is universal, that resonates. We come out as undocumented. We talk about the challenges that we are faced with. And you might think it's impossible, but you know what, though? When we started having conversations about marriage equality, we didn't think that we would find nuns and priests who would support marriage equality, but it happened. Sometimes when you share your personal story, you just don't realize the power in that. So, I'd like to mention the name of the individual who I met with. Would it surprise you to know? Oh, here's the thing, before I even say that. Another thing that I definitely have to mention right now is we need to look at the history of our own movement, and this is why. Would it surprise you to know that this individual who was behind marriage equality and making it happen, making it become a reality in Illinois, his name is Rick Garcia. He's part Mexicano. A lot of people don't know that. You know why? Because he's gay, and he's telling his story over here. But if we, as one community, begin to tell all of our stories, do you understand the power in that? Would it surprise you to know that Rick Garcia looked at the history of our movement and was influenced, inspired by the United Farm Workers movement? You're like, say what? United Farm Workers were responsible for gay marriage? Thank you, Cesar. So, the name of that Mexican that makes me incredibly proud, yeah, it's people like Cesar Chavez. It's people like Dolores Huerta. It's people like Rita Lozano. I'm incredibly proud of our brothers and sisters that are at the forefront of immigration reform. But you know what? I'm equally as proud of people like Rick Garcia. I'm just as proud of people like Mona Noriega, a fierce Latina lesbian activist who co-founded Amigas Latinas, who today happens to be the Commissioner of Human Relations, who also happens to be of Mexican descent. But not many people know that. So, you know what? I'm also just as proud of Felipe, a 16-year-old who had the courage to come out not knowing whether or not he'd have a roof over his home, but he had to, because to not do so was even worse. And I'm just as proud of people of the legacy of Gwen Araujo. She was a transgender individual who was assassinated. And she finally put a spotlight on transgender hate crimes. She became the poster child of Mexican descent. Again, not many people know that. So I stand here tonight before you with great pride in all these individuals, and I challenge you to go out there and share their stories as well. Because when we do, we're contributing to the legacy of the Mexican community, and it makes our story that much more powerful, that much more incredible, and that much more beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, so now the amount of power in number should never be underestimated. Take a look around all these people here tonight, and it took the work of so many to bring us all together. Especially, we want to recognize our inaugural class of MEX talkers. This group of nearly 100 people serve as MEX Talks ambassadors charged with outreach for tonight's event. Let's take all this. Are you going to put the list? Yeah. All right. That's a list of people. Wow, very impressive, right? So the question for you guys, do you want to be a MEX talker next year? And if you want, there will be a reception, and it will be after the program. You can talk to one of the volunteers and sign up your name, and hopefully they will pick you for next year. As we looked at these names, I also want to make a special mention of the group of people who sat on the MEX Talks Strategic Planning Committee. These folks were responsible for selecting the event's theme and nominating speakers. The 2014 group includes Tonantzin Carmona, del City of Chicago Office of New Americans, Marty Castro, Castro Synergies, Alexis Esparza, the new Executive Director of 18th Street Development Corporation, Maria Gonzalez, undocumented youth organizer, also a MEX Talk speaker for next year, Luis Gutierrez, founder and Executive Director of Latinos Progresando, Manuel Jimenez from Marquette Bank, Sarah McElmurray from the Chicago Council of Global Affairs, Sofia Mendez from the United Way of Metropolitan Chicago, Amanda Navarro from the BMO Harris Bank, Teresa Reyes from the Governor's Office of the New Americans, Adriana Soto, the Resurrection Project, Carlos Tortolero from the National Museum of Mexican Art. Un aplauso muy grande para todos ellos. And we want also to thank United Way Jose Rico. He donated his time to coach many of tonight's speakers. With that, let me now bring our last speaker. Although he's joining us today all the way from Washington, D.C., Larry Gonzalez was born and raised in Chicago. His career in politics has spanned campaign organizing, political staffing, and directing the National Association of Latino elected and appointed officials, commonly known as NALEO. Today, Larry represents clients in legislative battles as a leader of Latin strategies at the Washington, D.C. base Raven Group. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Gonzalez.
Queridos amigos, les habla la esposa del senador John F. Kennedy, candidato a la presidencia de los Estados Unidos. En estos tiempos de tanto peligro, cuando la paz mundial se ve amenazada por el comunismo, es necesario tener en la Casa Blanca un líder capaz de guiar nuestros destinos con una mano firme. Mi esposo siempre vigilará los intereses de todos los sectores de nuestra sociedad que necesitan la protección de un gobierno humanitario para el futuro de nuestros niños y para lograr un mundo donde exista la paz verdadera. Voten ustedes por el Partido Demócrata el día 8 de noviembre. Que viva Kennedy.
How many of you have seen that before? I wanted to start out with that because it's political history. And every time I see that, I can't help but think, 54 years ago, that was 1960, somebody in a room thought of the Mexican community. Because make no mistake, this is about the Mexican community. I mean, to be sure, there were, Cubanos and others here, but in such small numbers that essentially this was an appeal to the Mexican community. And somebody who made that decision realized what the future of the Mexican-American community could mean. Not just in that election, but also moving forward in the United States of America. And to be sure, it was about winning an election, but imagine what people must have thought at that point of John F. Kennedy's campaign. Geez, this guy's a goner. He's trying to appeal to people who are basically invisible in the United States, and he's trying to do it in a foreign language. What's he thinking? And yet here we are, 54 years later, and it made me wonder, do we believe in our own power, in our own destiny, and will we try to control it? I mean, in later years after JFK took the presidency, we heard many stories about LBJ as president, and he had a very special relationship with the Mexican-American community, and a number of books have been written about that, but that's Texas, so it made sense. Much like, and you guys can boo and hiss about this comment, but I think it was real, the fact that George W. Bush was able to appeal to a Mexican community in Texas and be a successful governor. Again, it's based, we all have our opinion on that. But the man won 44% of the Latino vote across the United States because I think he had a better understanding. So here we are now in the year 2014, and we're talking about what if every Mexican voted. Now, of course, that's kind of pie in the sky, right, to think about whether every Mexican would vote based on our numbers. And a lot of what we've heard this evening is not exactly peaches and cream, and we're not where we should be. We know that. I've been in many rooms myself where, champagne corks are being popped over the fact that Latinos did, in fact, decide the presidential election in 2012 with their turnout, record numbers. But that makes sense because we do have the numbers. Our numbers continue to increase. And while we're excited about the 11.5 million that participated, make no mistake, 12 million didn't. And so where do we go from here? We've heard some wonderful stories this evening and suggestions about ways to engage the community. One of the things that stuck with me, and that's what happens when you're number 7 on the list for speaking, you get to think a lot more about what you're going to say, or alter course if as need be. I think Alba brought up a really good point about information. And by virtue of my previous role working for NALEO, it's an organization that does a lot of issues around civic participation and trying to persuade the Latino community to come out. There's another element of that, though, and I think it's very unfortunate that, and I'm going to use this term, don't get mad at me, Alba, I'm going to use the term mainstream media. I consider Telemundo and Univision mainstream, but I'm talking about the ABCs and the NBCs and the CBSs, that they don't do as much political, in my opinion, coverage as Univision and Telemundo, where they're really trying to educate our community and offer them, as you say, that information. And one of the things we always talked about was the key for our community to participate was, of course, information. But this second part of the formula, and there's a plus, so it's information plus, was something that I learned early on, but also just hit me more recently. I flew in or back to Chicago from a campaign in Phoenix, Arizona, where a young Mexicano, well, he's half Mexicano and half Colombiano, just ran for political office, 34 years old. When we talk about, also a former Chicagoan, Harvard graduate, you know, many of us have a similar story where we probably have no business being where we are, but we're all instilled the value of hard work. Anyway, long story short, he was able to win. He was not the chosen candidate. This is Phoenix, Arizona, and he was up against the powers that be, and yet he engaged the community. He invited them to participate. Many of the young people here tonight, it's very inspiring. He was able to do that. In fact, he had a group of, I understand you don't want to be called a dreamer, but for this purpose, he engaged a group of young people. And even though they could not vote, they were so excited to participate. And of course, what's going on in Arizona with SB 1070 and the past, and there's an energized electorate, the majority Mexican American in Arizona. And he was able to overcome. And the key was to invite the community to participate. Sounds like a very simple formula, and perhaps I'm oversimplifying, but it's information plus invitation equals participation. And I say the invitation part because although some of the stories we heard may be anecdotal, it still never ceased to amaze me that we knocked on doors and we talked to people, and the person that had been in that office prior to this campaign was there for 24 years. And while he did a wonderful job while he was in Congress, there was never a need to really reach out to our community, to build a bigger tent, so to speak. Let's build our electorate. Let's bring more people in. And so we're knocking on doors for people who had lived in this community for 2 decades. And they said, you know that you're the first person that has come and asked me to vote and talked to me about voting in 20 years. And I'm sure those are very, very similar stories here in the city of Chicago where, you know, we have issues, we have situations now where, for better or for worse, and again, we could get into, I know Dr. Andrade with his history, we could get into long-winded conversations about the value of majority minority districts where we're getting our folks elected. But you know, it's a very, very difficult thing when we're not having competition, we're not having this strong debate in the community about who should be elected and why and what are the key issues. And so for me, it was a very amazing time to see that formula actually work, that he was able to not only provide information to people, even at its most basic level. I mean, by show of hands, how many of you have actually worked on a political campaign? That's a lot of folks. That's that's why you're here tonight, I'm sure, as well. You know, the folks that usually are at these things are the most civically minded, civic-minded, and participating in their communities. That's very good. And so I think you understand the value of, and for those of you who didn't raise your hand, I would suggest that you try to get involved in a political campaign, even if it's talking to people on the phone, knocking on doors, whatever it is you can do, the value of understanding what's important to people. And there's so many other issues. We heard earlier today that we're not one-trick ponies. We're not only about immigration reform. And so to have that value, to have that experience of what is it going to take to get people out, what matters to them, those are the things that we have to demand from our elected officials more. I mean, you heard that I'm from Washington. I miss Chicago. It's the greatest city in the world. Go for the cheap applause. But Chicago does have a wonderful history of several successes. One of the things that came to mind as I was listening to some of the other speakers also, and particularly in the context of coalitions, is Harold Washington as the mayor of the city of Chicago. That doesn't happen unless there's a coalition of, as they called it, black and brown, but the Mexican-American community and the African-American community. And so we do need to see this. I would say that if there's a takeaway about how do we move our community forward, and eventually we're going to be able to do it on our own, but is there value in that? And I think there are all of these other coalitions that exist that we need to tap into. And so when you think about what would happen if every Mexican voted, would the government have shut down if every Mexican voted? Some of you may not be aware that basically it was 30 to 40 people that shut down the federal government. Why? There's no political payback. There's no Latinos. There's no Mexican Americans in these districts. Why? Because these folks were elected without our input, and they drew the political maps. So on and on and on. What if every Mexican voted? Would Geraldo Rivera still be on Fox News? I don't know. I've always wondered that. Probably not. Would Fox News exist? Actually, is the really question. No. For those of you who like Fox News, I apologize. So no, look, looking forward, I think that we have to look within ourselves. We can't do it alone as a Mexican-American community. It's a brave new world than it was 54 years ago. When we talk about now, we're talking about Latinos and Hispanics, and so it's a bigger coalition, and folks that we have a sense of commonality with throughout the country, whether it's the Puerto Rican community or the Cubans. And folks, if we want to learn, whatever you think of the Cuban experience and Cuban exiles, look at the political power that the Cuban community has in the United States. And yes, some would argue, well, it pertains to Florida. 5% of the population holds a lot of issues hostage in Washington, D.C. And so I think there are places where we want to be. We can learn. We shouldn't be too proud to not learn from others. I know, some of the experiences we've had around voting rights issues and others have just been tremendous. And also, look, a lot of our leaders are stepping up. I don't know if you all are familiar with something called the Latino Victory Project. You may have read about it. I think there's been some level of ridicule, which has been unfair. Eva Longoria, the actress, I think people don't take her seriously, but she's very serious about moving the Mexican-American community forward and working with other Mexican-American leaders. Just before I came up, there was a quick discussion of money. And we all live in the real world, and money talks. And we know there's a lot of successful people, not only in this room, but across the United States, that we need to be engaging and saying, look, $25, $100, $500. They all seem to step up for President Obama. Unfortunately, all that didn't trickle down to many of the other races where we needed help. And so, even someone like George Lopez, I mean, again, people will laugh, oh, George Lopez. He was out there. He was taking the responsibility. He felt very strongly about his responsibility as having celebrity to be able to reach our community in a very unique way. And he truly believed that one day if we all worked together, that we could put a Latino in the White House. I mean, he'd be white with blue trim, right, and everything, but, the Latino would be there. So I thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Muchas gracias a todos por asistir a este evento. Le damos las gracias a IIT 10 College of Law, our speakers, CAN TV, El Periódico Hoy, Dot Press, the Chicago Community Trust, On behalf of Telemundo Chicago, thank you very much and have a great night.